You know that moment when you think you know someone your entire life, and then one sentence changes everything? Well, my father's last words to me were, "You don't deserve a cent." I walked away from his deathbed thinking I'd lost not just a parent, but any chance at the family fortune. What I didn't know was that those words weren't an insult. They were the key to the biggest secret he'd ever kept. Before we dive into this story, if you're someone who believes that family secrets always come out eventually, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, stick around. This one's for you. I never lived up to my father's expectations. While my older brother Daniel built his law practice and my sister Jennifer climbed the corporate ladder, I was the one who dropped out of business school to become a freelance photographer. Not exactly what Robert Mitchell had in mind for his youngest son. Dad owned Mitchell and Associates, a construction company that had built half the commercial buildings in our city. He was the kind of man who wore suits to barbecues and checked his phone during Christmas dinner. Success wasn't just important to him, it was everything. Our relationship had been strained for years. Every family gathering became a passive-aggressive interrogation about my career choices. He'd introduced Daniel as my son the attorney, and Jennifer as my daughter the marketing director, but me, I was just Alex. He takes pictures. The final blow came 2 years ago when I asked him alone to open my own photography studio. He looked at me across his mahogany desk and said, "I'm not funding your hobby, Alex. It's time you got a real job." We barely spoke after that. I'd show up for mandatory family events, exchange pleasantries, and leave as soon as possible. Mom would call sometimes, begging me to just talk to your father, but I was done trying to earn his approval. So when I got the call that he'd had a heart attack, I felt this weird mix of grief and relief. Maybe now I could stop disappointing him. The ICU smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Dad looked smaller than I remembered, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. Daniel and Jennifer had been taking shifts, playing the role of devoted children. I'd been avoiding the hospital altogether. But Mom insisted I come. She said, "He's been asking for you," though I found that hard to believe. When I finally walked into that sterile room, Dad's eyes opened immediately. It was like he'd been waiting. Daniel and Jennifer stepped back, giving us space I didn't want. "Alex." His voice was barely a whisper, but it still carried that familiar tone of disappointment. "Hey, Dad." I stood at the foot of his bed, keeping my distance. He struggled to sit up a little, his eyes never leaving mine. "I need to tell you something." The machines beeped faster. A nurse glanced over but didn't interrupt. I know you think I never believed in you." His breathing was labored. "But you're wrong." I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected. "Dad, you don't need to." "Let me finish." He raised a trembling hand. "Your photography, it's not a hobby. It's art. Real art. I've been following your work." The room went silent except for the ventilator. Following my work? I'd barely shared anything with the family. "I was wrong about a lot of things, Alex, but I was never wrong about you being different. Different isn't bad. It's necessary." Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You don't deserve a cent." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Daniel and Jennifer exchanged glances. Mom gasped. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "You don't deserve a cent," he repeated, his eyes boring into mine. "You deserve so much more." But before I could ask what he meant, the machine started screaming. Nurses flooded in. Within minutes, Robert Mitchell was gone, taking his cryptic last words with him. 2 weeks later, we sat in the offices of Peterson, Price and Associates for the reading of Dad's will. The law firm occupied the top floor of one of Dad's buildings. All glass and steel. Intimidation. Mr. Peterson, Dad's longtime attorney, looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through the papers. "Before we begin, I want to say that your father was very specific about his wishes." The will was pretty standard at first. The house went to Mom, along with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Daniel got Dad's share in the law firm downtown. Jennifer received the vacation home in the mountains and a substantial trust fund. Then Peterson paused. "As for Alex Mitchell," I braced myself. "Your father has left you a single item." He slid a small envelope across the table. "He insisted this be given to you exactly as written." My hands shook as I opened. Inside was a single photograph. One of mine, actually. It was a black and white shot I'd taken of an old man feeding pigeons in the park. I'd submitted it to a local art show 3 years ago. How did Dad even know about it? But there was something else in the envelope. A key. Old. Brass.
with an intricate design I didn't recognize. That's it? Jennifer couldn't hide her confusion. A picture and a key? I'm afraid so, Peterson said. Your father was quite insistent that this was Alex's complete inheritance. Daniel leaned forward. What does the key open? Peterson shrugged. Mr. Mitchell didn't specify. He only said that Alex would know what to do with it when the time came. I stared at the photograph. The old man in the picture looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. And the key, I'd never seen it before in my life. This is insane, Jennifer muttered. Dad gives us property and money, and Alex gets a picture and a mystery key? But something about Peterson's expression told me there was more to this story. He kept glancing at me like he was waiting for something. Is there anything else? Not officially, he cleared his throat. Though your father did leave me with specific instructions should you ever come asking about the photograph. What kind of instructions? He said to tell you that some pictures are worth more than buildings. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the photograph, trying to figure out why Dad had kept it. The old man in the picture had kind eyes and weathered hands. He was wearing a simple brown jacket and holding a small paper bag of breadcrumbs. I remember taking this shot. It was a raining Tuesday morning, and I'd been walking through Central Park, feeling sorry for myself after another rejection from a gallery. The old man had been sitting on a bench, completely absorbed in feeding the pigeons, despite the drizzle. There was something peaceful about the scene that made me stop and capture it. The contrast between the man's stillness and the chaotic flutter of wings around him. I titled it Patience. But why did Dad have it? And where did this key come from? I decided to start with the obvious question. Who was the old man in the photograph? The next morning, I went back to Central Park with the photo. It was a long shot, but maybe someone would recognize him? I spent hours showing it to regular park visitors, joggers, dog walkers. Nothing. Then, around noon, I approached an elderly woman feeding ducks by the pond. Excuse me, showed her the photograph. Do you happen to know this man? She studied it carefully, then looked up at me with sharp blue eyes. That's Henry Chen. He used to come here every day. Haven't seen him in a while, though. Do you know where I might find him? She shook her head. Henry was, well, he was homeless. Lived rough for years.
But he was the kindest man you'd ever meet. Always had time to talk, never asked for anything. Homeless. That detail hit me like a ton of brick. Why would my successful, image-conscious father have kept a photograph of a homeless man? Is there anything else you can tell me about him? The woman thought for a moment. There was something different about Henry. He spoke like he'd been educated, you know? And sometimes he'd say things that made you think he'd lived a very different life before ending up on the streets. I thanked her and walked away, more confused than ever. But as I was leaving the park, I noticed something I'd missed before. In the background of my photograph, barely visible, was a small building. And on that building was a sign, Chen's Market. Chen's Market sat on the corner of 5th and Morrison, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. The building was old, probably from the 1940s, with faded brick and windows that had seen better days, but it was still operating. I pushed through the door, setting off a small bill. Behind the counter was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. Can I help you? I pulled out the photograph. I'm looking for information about Henry Chen. Her expression changed immediately. She came around the counter and took the photo with trembling hands. Where did you get this? I took it about 3 years ago. I'm trying to find out more about Henry. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the image. Henry was my father-in-law. This store, it was his originally. Was? He died 6 months ago. Pneumonia. She wiped her eyes. He'd been living on the streets for almost 10 years. We tried to help him, but he was too proud. Said he'd made his choices and had to live with them. What happened? Why was he homeless? She gestured to the nearly empty shelves around us. The market was doing fine until about 12 years ago. Then big chain stores moved in and a developer started buying up the whole block. Henry couldn't compete. He lost everything. The store, his house, his savings. Who was the developer? She gave me a bitter smile. Mitchell and Associates, your father's company. The room started spinning. My father's company had destroyed Henry Chen's life, and somehow Dad had ended up with a photograph of the man he'd ruined. I don't understand, I said. Neither did we at first. But about a year ago, your father started coming by. He'd buy small things, leave large tips. He seemed guilty about something. He asked a lot of questions about Henry. What kind of questions? About his life before the business failed, about his family, about whether he was happy. She paused. He also asked about this photograph, said he'd seen it in some art show and wanted to know if it was really Henry. My mind was racing. Dad had seen my photograph at the art show, recognized Henry Chen, and then what? Started visiting the market? Did he say anything else? Just that he was working on making things right. But Henry died before. She shrugged helplessly. I looked around the failing market, understanding beginning to dawn. Is the building still for sale? Everything's for sale. We can't afford to stay open much longer. I pulled out the brass key. Have you ever seen this before? She examined it closely. It looks like an old safe deposit box key. Henry had one similar. He used to joke that all his treasures were locked away where no one could find them. The key led me to First National Bank, where I spent 2 hours convincing them to let me access a safe deposit box registered under Henry Chen's name. The bank manager finally agreed when I showed him a death certificate and explained the situation. The box was small, and at first glance it seemed almost empty, but inside were 3 items that changed everything. First, there was a deed, the original deed to the building where Chen's Market stood, dated 1952.
Henry Chen hadn't just owned the store, he'd owned the entire building. Second, there was a letter addressed to the photographer who saw me. It was dated just 2 weeks before Henry died. Third, and most shocking of all, there was a sealed envelope marked for Robert Mitchell's son. I opened the letter first. Dear photographer, I don't know your name, but I know you saw me. Really saw me. Not just an old homeless man, but a person with dignity. Your photograph captured something I thought I'd lost forever. If you're reading this, then Robert Mitchell kept his word. He found you, and he found a way to make things right. The deed in this box is worth more than money. It's worth redemption. I lost my business, my home, my family's legacy. But I never lost my faith that some people still see the humanity in others. Your photograph reminded me of that. The building is yours now. Do with it what you will. But remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the chance to be better than those who came before. With gratitude, Henry Chen. I stared at the letter, tears blurring my vision. Then I opened the envelope marked for Robert Mitchell's son. Inside was a legal document transferring ownership of the building to me, signed by Henry Chen and witnessed by my father. But there was also a handwritten note from Dad. Alex, you don't deserve a cent of dirty money, but you deserve the chance to clean it up. Henry Chen was a good man who I wronged. Your photograph showed me what I'd done, not just to his business, but to his spirit. I spent the last year of my life trying to make amends. The building is worth $2.3 million. Chen's Market pays $800 a month in rent. Do the math. But more than that, you have the chance to do what I never could. Put art and humanity before profit. The ground floor is yours to do as you please. I have a suggestion, but the choice is yours. You were never a disappointment, son. You were a reminder of who I could have been. Love, Dad. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork and emotional revelations. The building was indeed worth $2.3 million, and it was now legally mine. But understanding the full scope of what Dad had done took time. Through Peterson, I learned that Dad had been quietly meeting with Henry Chen for months before the old man's death. He'd been trying to find a way to return the building without making it look like charity. Henry had been too proud to accept direct help, but he'd agreed to this elaborate plan. Your father was very specific, Peterson explained during one of our meetings. He wanted you to have a choice. You could sell the building and walk away with the money, or you could honor Henry Chen's memory by doing something meaningful with it. What did Dad suggest? Peterson smiled. He thought you might want to turn the ground floor into a photography gallery, something focused on street photography. Everyday people, stories that don't usually get told. I thought about Henry Chen, sitting in that park day after day, feeding pigeons while the world ignored him, until someone with a camera decided he was worth capturing. The decision wasn't hard. I visited Mrs. Chen in the market and told her about the building. She cried when I explained that she could stay as long as she wanted, that the rent would remain the same forever. Henry would have loved this, she said. He always believed in second chances. But I wasn't done. I had one more surprise. Mrs. Chen, how would you feel about expanding the market? Maybe adding a small cafe. I think this neighborhood could use a gathering place. Her eyes lit up. Henry always talked about that. He wanted to create a space where people could come together, share stories. Then let's do it. Partners? Renovating the ground floor took 3 months.
I kept the original hardwood floors and exposed brick walls, but added professional lighting and clean white display space. The back room became a small office and storage area. I called it the Patience Gallery, after my photograph of Henry Chen. The opening exhibition was titled Invisible People: Street Photography from the Heart. It featured work from 12 photographers, all focused on capturing the dignity and humanity of people society often overlooks. My photograph of Henry Chen was the centerpiece, but it wasn't alone. There were images of construction workers on their lunch breaks, street musicians lost in their music, elderly couples sharing quiet moments on park benches. But the real surprise came the night before the opening. I was hanging the last few pieces when Mrs. Chen appeared with a box. "I found these in Henry's things," she said. "I thought you might want to see them." Inside the box were dozens of photographs. Henry Chen had been a photographer too, documenting his life on the streets with a small disposable camera. The images were raw, honest, beautiful. A homeless man's perspective on a world that had forgotten him. "These need to be in the exhibition," I said. Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Henry would have been too embarrassed. He always said his pictures weren't good enough. He was wrong. These are incredible." We added a section called Henry's Eyes to the exhibition. His photographs hung alongside work by professionals, and you couldn't tell the difference. Art is art, regardless of the artist's circumstances. The gallery opening was everything I dreamed of and more. The space was packed with people from all walks of life: art collectors, students, neighbors, photographers, and people who had known Henry Chen. Daniel and Jennifer showed up, looking confused but trying to be supportive. They still didn't understand what Dad had done or why, but they were beginning to see that maybe there was more to the story than they had realized. "I have to admit," Daniel said, studying Henry's photographs, "I never would have thought Dad capable of something like this. He was different than we thought. Maybe we all were." The evening's highlight came when an elderly man approached me near Henry's photograph. "Are you the photographer who took this?" "Yes, sir. I'm Father Miguel from St. Anthony's Church. Henry used to come to our soup kitchen. He talked about you sometimes. Said there was a young man who saw him as a person, not just a problem." I felt a lump in my throat. "I just took a picture." Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes being seen is the most important thing in the world. As the evening went on, I watched people engaging with the photographs, really looking at them, seeing the humanity in faces they might pass on the street without noticing. A young art student spent 20 minutes studying Henry's series about sleeping in doorways. A businessman in an expensive suit stood transfixed by a photograph of homeless veterans. A mother explained to her daughter why the old man feeding pigeons looked so peaceful. This was what Dad had understood in his final months, that my photography wasn't just about capturing images, it was about capturing souls. 6 months after the gallery opened, I was sitting in the small cafe Mrs. Chen had built in the back corner of the market. The space had become exactly what Henry had envisioned, a gathering place where people shared stories over coffee and pastries. The gallery was thriving. We'd hosted 4 exhibitions, sold dozens of photographs, and more importantly, started conversations about the people we see but don't really notice. I was editing photos for the next show when Mrs. Chen approached my table. "There's someone here to see you," she said. I looked up to see a teenage girl, maybe 16, holding a small digital camera. "Are you Alex Mitchell?" she asked nervously. "That's me."
"I've been coming to the gallery every week since it opened. I love photography, but I can't afford art school or expensive equipment." She held up her camera. "This is all I have, but I've been taking pictures of my neighborhood, trying to show people the way you showed Henry Chen." She pulled out a small stack of printed photographs. They were remarkable. Street scenes from a low-income neighborhood, capturing moments of joy, struggle, connection, and hope. I was wondering, do you think these are good enough for the gallery? I looked through her images, seeing the same eye for humanity that had drawn me to photography in the first place. "Lisa, these aren't just good enough. They're exactly what we need." "Really?" "Really. But I have a better idea. How would you like to be our first artist in residence? You could work here, learn from visiting photographers, and we'd help you build a portfolio for art school." Her eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? It's what Henry would have wanted. It's what my father would have wanted." As Lisa left, clutching her photographs and a residency agreement, I thought about Dad's last words. "You don't deserve a cent, because you deserve so much more." He'd been right. I'd inherited something more valuable than money, the opportunity to see people the way they deserve to be seen, and to help others do the same. The gallery's mission statement, painted in elegant script on the wall, said it all. Every person has a story worth telling. Every story deserves to be seen. I pulled out my phone and looked at the most recent photo I'd taken, Lisa, sitting in the cafe, showing her work to Mrs. Chen, both of them smiling. Some pictures really are worth more than buildings. Dad would have been proud. So that's the story of how my father's last words led to the inheritance I never knew I needed. Sometimes the most valuable things we leave behind aren't in bank accounts or real estate. They're in the opportunities we create for others to find their own worth. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of seeing people for who they really are, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the hidden connections that shape our lives. And if you're someone who's ever felt overlooked or undervalued, remember Henry Chen, remember Lisa, remember that your story matters. Someone out there needs to see the world through your eyes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.